All right. And finally, we'd like to welcome our immediate past president, Tony Perozzi, once more to the stage. Tony, your leadership last season was integral to our efforts in recruiting an impressive lineup of speakers. Tony oversaw our transition to an electronic ticketing system, to a robust membership recruitment effort, to a multitude of advancements in both technological and procedural areas, and continue to improve our members' experience and strengthen our organization as a whole. Last season, he had 11 events, 9 of which were sold-out crowds, and 3 of which took place in the time frame of 1 month, and that was a feat that had never been accomplished in Forum Club history. So, Tony, I don't know if they can put the picture up of the collage. So, we'd like to present you with this collage, the caliber of speakers. Okay, Tony. The caliber of don't go anywhere. The caliber of speakers during Tony's year on his presidency were robust, balanced, and dynamic, and the Forum Club future has never looked so bright. And now, Tony, as you step into the traditional role of a past president, which means returning to the golf course, we felt there was no better way to cap off your presidency than with a presidential hat of your own. Custom made for number 42.
Oh, that's perfect.
But wait, there's more. And just in case the rules at Jupiter Hills Country Club preclude you from wearing the white hat on the course, we have a red one, so that the Forum Club will always be with you on the back 9.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
And now for one last mention. Since we know that standing with every great man is a great woman, we'd also like to recognize your wife, Kelly, Tony, for all of her support during this presidential year. Kelly Perozzi, madam, if you please stand. It's now my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce today's program. Before former White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer made his mark of one of the most recognized staffers in the Trump administration, he built a decades-long career in Republican politics. He witnessed and shaped the inner workings of Washington, D.C. from every vantage point, as a House of Representatives communicator, as assistant U.S. trade representative, as the chief strategist to the Republican National Committee, and top advisor to presidential campaigns. In December of 2016, he received that call of a lifetime. President-elect Donald J. Trump had chosen him to be the White House press secretary, and his life has never been the same since. When Sean accepted the job, he was far from a household name, but then he walked into the bright lights of the briefing room and the camera started rolling, and his every word was scrutinized. His movements parodied. Every detail about him became a meme. And that's just what we saw in the White House briefing room and, of course, on Saturday Night Live. Few in Washington are as well equipped as Sean Spicer to pull back the curtain and dissect what's really happening in the nation's capital, and we are excited to have him here today to give us some insight and stories of behind the scenes of some of the biggest news of our time. So while he has chosen to physically step away from the podium, which I understand, and take chairs, we look forward to gaining your unique insights, Sean, into the current administration and the inner workings of our federal government. Without further ado, it's my privilege to introduce Sean Spicer and Tim Burke. Please take the stage.
Thank you.
Thank you. I do have the privilege of being today's moderator, and Sean, you're used to this scenario, so
I like the chairs a lot better.
That's true. But let me start, and My sources, now I have good sources in my business. My sources tell me that you have an excellent sense of humor. I think some of us watched you in the Grammy Awards. So I would like to start by asking you if you agree with my assessment that today's crowd is the largest audience ever witnessed a luncheon, period, both in person and around the globe.
Hold on. You don't mind if I look at the aerial footage first? Oh, yeah, unquestionably.
All right, now that we got that out of the way. Now, Sean is, as many of you know, is no stranger to Florida and Palm Beach County. We talked about this briefly. What do you remember bringing it home to us about hanging chats, about recounts, about Clay Shaw's re-election campaign, and about Mar-a-Lago?
I got my start in this area working for Mark Foley as his comms director, and you know, I don't know that I'd be in politics to the degree I am without Mark, because Mark, you may not know this, but he loves the media. And for a young rank and file guy, he sort of was like, look, let's go, let's be aggressive. And he kind of taught me, you know, how to be aggressive, how to hunt for press. He was a rank and file guy in an area where you had a giant like Clay Shaw and a lot of other members of Congress in the same media market, obviously 2 senators. And Mark was hungry to find things, and that made, as a young rank and file press secretary, that means you had to be innovative, you had to be aggressive, you had to think on your feet and try to think of new different angles, because you know, whether it's the Palm Beach Sun-Sentinel, the Miami Herald, everybody could go to 10 different sources. So the question is, why do we need Mark Foley's voice in this? What makes what he's doing? And it was a great way to get an introduction into thinking about earned media, how to get an event going. My first, this isn't in the book, so I'll tell you, but the first time I ever came down here, I was excited. I mean, I get to Florida. I grew up in Rhode Island, and I hadn't really been to Florida a lot. And so Mark says, I want you to come down and meet a lot of the folks in the district media, meet some of the folks who are in our district office. Ed Chase is here, Don, and you know, get to see some of these folks that you talked to on the phone. And so I land at West Palm Airport. I get a rental car, and you know, I check in, and I'm in the car, and I look, and I go, wow, you have convertibles? And they go, yeah. And so I said, well, how much extra? And they said, well, you know, it's $15 or whatever it was. And I thought, you can't go to Florida without getting a convertible. And so I paid the extra money out of my own pocket, and I just thought, hey, you can't drive without a convertible in Florida. And I remember I'm pulling into Mark's office, and they can see kind of going through the parking lot, and I walk in, and he's like, what the heck were you thinking? He's like, you have a purple convertible car. And they never let me live that down the entire time. And then in 2000, Clay Shaw was in a real tough re-election race.
He was struggling when you came aboard.
He was struggling. And the funny part is Mark had tried to get me to go help out Clay a couple times, and initially they just didn't work out. And so we got into the 1st of August, just about this time. I mean, it was literally about this weekend. And they were, you know, Clay was down heavy against Elaine Bloom. And they were like, look, now it's a must. Like, you got to go do this thing. And so I moved down to Fort Lauderdale, and Clay used to try to tell me that he was elected before I was born, which was not true. I was 1. and he had done things, mayor and a longtime congressman. And I'm sorry to say this, but so we're driving around one day, and Clay's like, I got that funding for that building. I put up that project. And I looked over and I said, with all due respect, Congress, most of those people are dead. Mm-hmm. And it was true that he had been elected in like 1976 for the first time, and had just sort of, you know, hadn't been challenged in a modern way for so long that a lot of the good deeds and projects and things that he had done to make this area a better place, the people that had been instrumental in making it happen had moved away, had passed away, whatever, and Clay had just not had a race in the way that he did. Well, lo and behold, it was 2000, and someone else was having a race in Florida. And so election night gets called, and we go into a recount in Palm Beach, Miami-Dade, and Fort Lauderdale, Broward County. And sure enough, you know, it turns out we were second in line at every event then, because it was Bush v. Gore, and it all became about hanging chads and intent to vote. And obviously, folks in Palm Beach don't need to be reminded of But that was a pretty intense time, and it was talk about like an introduction in the School of Hard Knocks elections. Clay won by 300 votes, and I remember at one point I just looked at him and I said, "We're going to declare victory." Clay's like, George Lemieux was there, and we're like, Clay's like, "No, we haven't won yet," and I'm like, "You have to declare victory, and then establish that we're the front runner and she's the underdog." And it was an unbelievable time because you had the presidential race happening at the same time, and we're struggling to get our message out and to get people to volunteer for our side at the same time. Everybody who's in the area is here because of the big show.
Now, fast forward to day one of your time as press secretary.
Okay.
I know.
A couple things happened in between.
Yeah, nothing happened on that first day, Sean.
My wife would probably take offense at that.
Now, you have said that your job as press secretary, and I think I'm quoting you accurately, was say what the president thinks and believes. You also said, and on your book tour, that you made some mistakes. You would like to do-over, such as on the first day in the inauguration buzz. How would you handle your job differently if you went back? And do you regret having to at times stand by the president and defending falsehoods?
Well, that's a lot. So let's kind of unpack it. I mean, I think, and again, I can go into as much detail as you want, but basically,
I only got 30 minutes.
I know, that's why I was just prefacing it with. I talk about this in painstaking detail in the book in terms of what first day was like, what our mindset was like. It's not an excuse. I've been very clear that if there's one day in my entire life to take a do-over on, that's number 1, 2, and 3. And it's not one thing. You don't go, okay, well, I mean, like, I look at the tape sometimes and I'm like, okay, I mean, there's everything from a tire, which apparently...
You spent a lot of money on suits, though, you said.
That was a fun exercise in debt. I was like, honey, I know we took a pay cut for this job, but now I'm going to max out a Visa card. But that was the kind of thing that I hadn't thought about. So it's like everything from a tire to tone. I mean, there's a lot. And I think that one thing that I've tried to say to folks is that, like, I don't think that you should live life looking in the rearview mirror and saying, here are all my regrets. The biggest issue for that day, and I talk about this in the book, is that I think I learned a lot that day about, the person that I want to be perceived as. I look at that tape and I'm like, that's not me. And that's not how I'd be perceived. And I also think that, again, every time I tell this, I think people think I'm trying to make an excuse. And I think what we tried to do that day, or what I tried to do, clearly not effectively, was make a case, try to pivot and say, okay, let's really focus on audience and intensity and enthusiasm. I get it. It did not go well. I've seen the reviews. And so there's a lot that I would do over in terms of crafting the message, having, what we should focus on. I talk in the book, one of the big myths out there is that the president pushed you out there to do all this. Yeah, he did say, go out and get this, like, this is ridiculous that we are now having a discussion about this. And without belaboring the point, just to give everyone just 2 seconds of mindset. The inauguration runs around. I'll put aside all the election for a moment. It's in terms of what was going on there. The president gets inaugurated, it's noon, we're at the Capitol, we go up to the Oval Office, we got this bare bones stuff. The president's like, you know what? I want to hit ground running and sign these executive orders and actions, kind of show the American people I am getting to work for them. So, great. We call in the press pool, which is this group of members of the media who represent, the TV, radio, the wires, et cetera, and there's a group of 12 that comes in to see the president in action. Their job is to basically document what's going on, who's in the room, what's happening for the rest of the White House press. They write a pool report, and then they send it back to everyone else who couldn't be in the room. So we go in, the president's talking, I'm signing this executive order, this is what I'm doing, this is going great. 20 minutes later, we get all these stories that start popping out because the pool report says not what the president did, not what we were talking about, not the issue, not who's in the room, but it says the president has removed the bust of Martin Luther King from the Oval Office. So I'm going, what, and I'm like, I got Ryan Kravis, who's the chief of staff, is like literally like running down the hall in the West Wing, snapping a picture of it, sending it to me, like, we got to get this out, here's what we're doing. Now, this is how we spent our first night in the White House. Not going to a ball, not celebrating it. Yes, I did go to a ball for anyone who wants to fact check me, but it was about midnight. But we weren't celebrating it. We were cleaning it up. And the pool sends out this report afterwards. Update. Someone must have been standing in front of the bus because I didn't see it. Now stop for a minute and understand this mentality. Not here was in the room. Here was what the actions were. Here was the flavor of the room. The bust of Martin Luther King is back here. Here's the Oval Office, here's the desk, here's the president, there's where the staff was. So the mentality going into that room wasn't what's going on, who's in there, what's happening. It was, how can we get you? Okay, I say that to make sure that people understand, this is how we literally are going, this is how we're starting our administration. Like, trying to figure out, where's that, oh, I get it, he also had one thread off his, I mean, like, really, you may not agree with what he's doing or how he's doing it, fine. But you're not there to, the gotcha mentality. So the president wakes up the next day and is like, you've got to be kidding me. Now we're talking about how many people were standing in a place. And I'm thinking, this is ridiculous. So the president says, go push back. So again, not excusing, explaining, just saying, I was starting, like it's a Saturday morning of a 3-day weekend after every federal employee had just worked tirelessly to put off this peaceful transfer of power of the inauguration. So no one's exactly sitting at their desk.
And this is your do-over, right?
Oh, this is day one. We haven't gotten there yet.
If you had to do the day one over again, and
right, so I'm getting, so the point is, so I'm calling up like media folks saying, hey, how much traffic did your website have? CNN's reporting 16-point-something million people watch parts of it online. Twitter's telling us it was the highest live event they've ever had. Remember, a lot of these platforms didn't exist 8 years ago. So I'm thinking, this isn't like a political statement. I'm not trying to say anything pro or con about Obama or anybody else because it didn't exist. You couldn't watch a live event on Twitter or Snapchat 8 years prior. So I'm thinking, hey, we're on pretty safe ground because the platforms that were the airing didn't exist. So we can kind of talk about enthusiasm, let's not focus on people. It didn't go well, I got it. But the intent, which is what I talk about in the book, was to try to say, hey, this is silly, look at this enthusiasm, and that was what we were trying to do, what I was trying to do. But I walked back into my office, like 20 feet from the Oval Office, the phone, and I'm thinking, I'm gonna get this attaboy, like, here you go, you crushed it. And he's just like, what the hell was that? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh God, I don't even have my ID yet. I'm like, this is it, I'm out. Like they're not even going to issue the parking pass. And I mean, I only say that because like, I think people like I can't begin to explain the level, the loneliness that exists. On that day, I'm like, oh my God, like everyone's like, hey, thinking of you. You know, if you're from the South, that's like the equivalent of bless your heart. Like, it's like, I mean, honestly, I'm like, I know what you're saying. Like,
again, going back to the do-over, if the president says something that you know is untrue, would you do it over again in terms of how you represented his
if someone asked me what the president thinks, and I think if you look at what I said, I think the president believes the following, the president thinks the following. I didn't say Sean Spicer believes this or the Academy of Sciences corroborates. I mean, my job, when asked, does the president believe the following? Yes. It's not to be an interpreter. Your tenure as a press secretary is about 5 seconds. If you stand up at this podium, no matter who speaks for it, and you go, the president believes this, but I got to be honest with you, it's not true. I mean, I don't. That's a really. I mean, that makes Scaramucci look like a long-termer. It just doesn't.
Would you do anything differently?
I mean, look. The answer is, look. I think regardless of who you are as a person, whether personally or professionally, I tend to look back on interactions that I have on a personal level and on a professional level and say, could I have done that better? Was I the best person that I could be? And that's like complete strangers. I'm like, gosh, I should have probably, given that individual, some change. I should have been kinder to the gate agent. I think that I try to every day figure out what I could have done to be a better person, a better professional. So I look back on every event. Usually when I'm done, I mean, the same way that sometimes people run films if you're in sports or whatever and say, hey, next time, hold the ball tighter. I mean, that's how I choose. I don't sit back and dwell in regrets as much as say, okay, I got to be better next time. I've learned from what I just did how I can improve the next time.
You were highly critical of the media in your book. You've made a couple of references today so far. Talk about how you contend that the media covers Republicans differently from Democrats. You don't need to go over your four. I think you in your book you listed the four items that around the media that you took issue with. But if you could highlight one of them that you thought was something that the media was doing unfairly.
Yeah. So let me just start with a couple things. Number one.
And number two, you think we are the enemy of the press?
No, let's get that out of the way. No, I But going back to the nut of your question, two things. One, in the book, I also call out a lot of reporters that I do think do a good job, and some of them will probably rather surprise. I don't agree with their stories all the time. They're tough, tenacious, but they're fair and professional. I think that there's a difference. I believe 100% that we need a robust and free media and press in a democracy, especially ours. You need it. That being said, the point that I get across in the book is that if I'm a journalist, and a good journalist, like every industry, I think there's good and there's bad. There are some great journalists. I don't agree with a lot of what they write all the time, but I think they're fair, professional. The difference is that in every single industry, people call out the good and the bad. So if you are a roofer, you'll say, hey, look, I take quality of my work. I follow up with customers. These other individuals are, shoddy, and they don't speak for the job that I do. I take pride in blah, blah, blah. I'm amazed that reporters refuse to call out each other. That I think there's a difference when you look at the current briefing room and you can say to yourself, as a journalist, I think that some of those antics and behavior represent the industry that I'm proud to be part of. I think that's a problem. When you think that it is respectful and civil, it's not about the story. It's not about furthering information to the public or getting to the truth. When your goal is to make the story about you and to jump up and down, flail your hands, and yell. That's not, I look at some of these reporters and I go, when was the last time that you broke a story? But there's plenty of times when you've gotten a YouTube clip about you doing something. And I mean, there was one reporter the other day that literally was probably from me to almost to the door that took a picture of himself and said, I was asking the president questions and he refused to answer. And other reporters actually, to my amazement, came out and said, you were 100 feet away. There's no way the president actually heard anything that you would have said. But if you imagine somebody standing here and yelling at that door a question for someone who was speaking at the end of an event, that to me is not an accurate representation of what goes on. And all too often, I think that what happens is that the people who do a good job get weighed down by the people that do a bad job by perpetrating false narratives and inaccurate information for the sake of it. And I give plenty of examples in the book and plenty of, I think, constructive criticism. But I think that, to me, the biggest issue is that there's no delineation these days between good and bad. And if I were in that profession, I would say that person, that kind of reporting, that kind of behavior does not represent who I believe I am as a journalist.
A couple recently related topic in question. A couple UN experts, the publisher of the New York Times had a private meeting with the president, expressed, and they were the latest to express some concern that the president's vitriol at his rallies, in his tweets, could lead to violence against reporters. Do you agree with that? And how would you advise the president on this issue? What would you say to him?
So my view is, based on what I just said, I think it's bad to paint any industry with a broad brush. I think that my view would be to say we're bringing down the good with the bad by using this tactic. I would rather call out specific examples where reporters either didn't live up to the journalistic standards of the story or their behavior was inappropriate than kind of paint everybody with a broad brush, because there are good reporters in that briefing room, and they do a good job. And I think that for the same reasons I just delineated, I think that we undermine the good people when we kind of clump them in with the bad people. And I think that's the difference. Now, that being said, let me just give you the other side of the...
Do you think we are at risk that the rhetoric could potentially cause violence against reporters?
Sure. But I also think that the thing that's interesting to me is, first of all, the thing that I find fascinating as a conservative is that as someone who's been, there's a couple examples in the book. Sarah Sanders is the first White House press secretary in history to have a Secret Service detail. They don't hand out details because they're bored. They hand them out because there's an active threat against you. I don't think we should be, the idea in this country that we're at a point where people, journalists, government officials, citizens, have to worry about their safety because they're expressing a point of view is a major problem in our society. I say
that would include the president.
Of course, no, but I think that all of us. But then I find fascinating about the question is, and this is why I think, and I'm just saying this respectfully, that I think part of the problem is that when the press feels threatened, and I don't support that in a way. It should be denounced. No one should feel threatened about expressing a point of view or writing about it. That being said, where has been the concern about threats against conservatives, threats against other government officials? It's all about the biggest issue that I think, and I say this with all due, like literally as very constructive, the problem that the press have sometimes is that they focus so much on themselves that what happens is people who have felt this way go, wait, what was your concern when I felt threatened? Where was your concern with someone who was serving in office felt threatened? It's when you suddenly feel what a lot of us have felt for a while. I mean, how do you think I felt when on the day I resigned, people camped out in front of my house, were knocking on neighbors' doors, were putting live camera, live streaming things. I mean, literally, while I was visibly still at the White House. How do you think I felt when people came up to me and said stuff? And yet, do you know what it became? A meme that reporters fostered on Twitter. So the funny part is, I don't support any of it. It's wrong. It's bad for our country. It is a horrible, I mean, the idea that society is having this discussion about what, like, people should be able to express themselves. That's the beauty of America. But where has the concern been when it's, for the last, frankly, for, years now, but especially in the last year, there didn't seem to be too much concern on that side. So I think it's wrong all around. It should be denounced. And where I think, frankly, we as a society should go is that when we see it happen, whether it's in our family, our workplace, or in a social environment, just stop and say, hey, let them, whether you're on the right or the left, just say, hey, let them finish. We're not listening enough anymore.
I would like to, yeah. It's
And I think that's the issue, is that it's become a shouting match at every barbecue, and it's like, and I say this because as a conservative, I mean, for years it's been like, oh, you're a Republican, so you fill in the blank. You're a sexist, racist, misogynist, I mean, whatever. But and you're going, okay, that's great. Like,
but you would advise the president, Tony.
Absolutely. Like I said, I think that we need to get back to listening, and when we see a problem, call it out as opposed to saying everybody's part. Because I don't like being grouped in this the way I just described. So I don't know that if I remember the press, I would take offense to that if I thought I was doing a good job. I would like, hey, I'm not one of the bad ones. So please don't lump me in. In the same way, I don't like to be lumped in when someone says, oh, you're a conservative, so you must be, fill in the blank.
Yeah, I was monitoring a discussion, similar discussion yesterday in Orlando, and somebody reminded me, from an industry standpoint, from our industry standpoint, a colleague of mine, the editor of the Washington Post said, and I truly believe this, is we're at war. We are not at war. We are at work. And I think it's a good reminder to all of us. Let me just move to a different topic. In the book, you talk about the president's empathy after your father's death. Is there one thing you would say to those Trump critics that would cast a more favorable light on him, or make someone think better of him, something he said to you, or something we may not realize or understand about the president that you would share with the audience today?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it, but I had some, family tragedy occur right after the election, and I personally witnessed a level of empathy and concern, not just once, but on several occasions, where you check in and say, hey, how you doing? And I lost my dad, and it was a very, and I watched him do with complete strangers. After the death of Chief Ryan Owens, the Navy SEAL that was killed during that attack, the way that he comforted his wife Karen and their kids, there were no cameras around. There wasn't, them. I've seen him get emotional about it, and again, that to me is a side that, for a variety of reasons we could go into, doesn't get out. And I don't think, it's not like I'm trying to be an apologist either, but I do think that there's a lot of folks who, I had one report at one point that said, the president I've never seen the president laugh. He clearly doesn't think anything's funny. I was like, are you kidding me? I mean, like, I've seen him howl, like, he mostly hit you guys. But I mean, I'm kidding, but it was like, but those kind of things where I was like, that's a pretty big thing to say about somebody that you've spent a limited amount of time with.
On Russia investigation and the Mueller investigation, obviously questions regardless of where your partisanship lies.
Yeah.
Just straight out, do you believe that it is a witch hunt, or do you believe that this is more about the president and his lawyers playing out a very smart political strategy?
So I think there's two things that have to get bifurcated with respect to Russia. One is collusion, the other is meddling. So let's just take the meddling first. There's no question that Russia has for decades, continues to try to meddle in our democracy. They've done it for a long time. I was briefed on it on October 27th at the Department of Security. I know that they've tried through a variety of efforts to do that. So that one I think will stop, no question about it. On the collusion one, I was on a campaign. If you remember, you guys covered it. I mean, the narrative, we couldn't collude with ourselves. You guys are disorganized. You don't know what you're doing. You're a bunch of jokesters. And, you know, Hillary's going to win. I mean, you read A. Chozik's book from the New York Times. They were all in this party. They were excited. And then we win, and it's like, oh, well, you guys must have colluded with Russia. Like, yep, yeah, that was it. I mean, I was like looking for cell phone numbers for like half of the people on the campaign. And suddenly you're like, yep, you were colluding.
So wait and see on the.
No, I've not. Look, I played a senior level on the campaign. I was a senior member of the transition to a senior White House staffer. I've never seen any evidence of anything that would lead me to believe that there's any evidence whatsoever of collusion. Zero. Not. That being said, I view the president it's clearly been very frustrating to be like, you got to be, like, at some point, put your cards on the table. Show me something that shows any kind of collusion that one entity conspired with another to an outcome. Because, honest to God, I mean, literally, there's nothing that is leaked out, and everything leaks out, that suggests that anybody even has an inkling of anything like that. So I think, you know, the biggest problem right now is that you've got those two pieces somewhat becoming amorphous, which is a problem. Because we do, as a country and a society, need to deal with making sure that Russia and any other entity that's to undermine our election process is stopped and halted. But one last thing that I want to mention on that, which is interesting. Russia spent like a couple $100,000 or something, $100,000, $150,000 on Facebook ads, which in the big scheme of things, when you're saying like $1 billion+ on an election, is this much. Their goal really wasn't to undermine election. It's to undermine confidence that we have in the integrity of our systems, to make us not believe, you know, to not trust, to not believe. And to some degree, their work, I think they are. Look at where we are as a society. We question each other, we stop, we don't believe them as much, we're undermining government institutions. I mean, the funny thing is that their goal for that kind of money, I mean, you all have been at the epicenter of a ton of elections, like, that's peanuts. And yet, what a real goal was to do is to undermine confidence that we have in our institutions, our government officials, and our media. And in a large way, I think to some degree they're succeeding.
I think my time and our time is winding down. I want to talk about a subject that I don't think has gotten a lot of attention. Much was written about the president's campaign and his unique and unorthodox style, his gut instinct, his ability to connect with the electorate on key issues. However, you do write about data operation.
Yes.
You wrote about the data operation in the book, and two names, Bill Skelly and Chris Carr, I believe, whom you say are most responsible after the president for his victory. Could you elaborate a little bit on that before we close?
So after the 2012 election, so here's the thumbnail sketch. President Obama, when he was running for election, did a really, the campaign was amazing. They had looked at what Bush had done and took it to a new level, in that they invested in, Bush had done called targeting and a 72-hour task force, which is get a lot of people out right before the election, take people to the polls. And then they did this thing called micro-targeting, which is look at a subset of people, extrapolate the traits that they have among a broad group, and say, okay, then this is how those voters will operate. What Obama did, frankly, was take that to a whole new level. Instead of 72 hours, they basically said people voting earlier and earlier because of absentee and no excuse early voting in a lot of states. So we need a longer ground game. We need to put people on the ground for a longer period of time, like 72 days plus. And then we need to start using data to understand exactly what voters do and why. What the RNC realized after the 2012 election is Obama did that fantastically for a candidate. What if we could do a party? And then you'd be able to bring in a lot more data points to understand it. So we spent $175 million on data and on the ground game. So what that meant is that for every 190 million voters that are in this country, we knew almost everything we could about them. When they voted, how they voted, what issues were important to them, who influenced them, what magazines they subscribed to, what organizations they belonged to, whether they had a dog, whether they did yoga classes, whatever it was. Little hint, if you're a yoga class goer, you tend to vote on election day. That's the kind of stuff that you can glean because you believe in schedules, but you start to recognize traits in people because of that. So it's not about polling and extrapolating big views, knowing what the data was. So you know who's voting, when they're voting. And what we were able to do is to look at all of the voters, all the swing states, and figure out who needed to get out and when. And the beautiful thing about it, and I talk about in the books, the actual numbers. We knew where the trend was going, and if we could get about what I call 6% in the book in key battleground states, people who were, we call them downshifters, people that were loyal, high-propensity Republican voters who hated Hillary Clinton but weren't comfortable with Trump. We knew if we could get them into a voting booth, create a binary choice between the two of them, by an overwhelming majority, they'd vote Trump. So we spent a lot of money getting out high-propensity voters, which is not normally a tactic that's used in a campaign. You normally bank those voters and say, those folks will go to the polls no matter what. And so I talk about that extensively because it largely got overlooked.
Yeah, it was I think the book was something that has not gotten a lot of attention. And my job today here is done, Sean. I'm going to turn it back over to Barbara, and thank you for your time and your answers.
Okay, Sean, so we know that Sean's accustomed to being put on the spot by the press corps, but today's questions will come directly from our audience. And this is our opportunity as citizen leaders to hear news and information from the source in an unfiltered format. So we're going to say that we trust that there'll be no fake news to report today. Sorry,
You can
it's
be
in
sure
my
of that.
script. Kick off our Q&A. We always take 2 questions from the students, at which point then we'll go ahead and take questions from the audience. We have a number of cards. If there are any others, please hold up your hands. Our first student today is from Florida Atlantic University. If you'll please stand, introduce yourself, and ask your question.
Hello, Mr. Spicer. My name is Pierre Ehrman. I'm a biology pre-med major at Florida Atlantic University. So my question is, how does one prepare for a White House press briefing when you could be asked anything by the media?
That's a great question, Pierce. I should have gone into biology. You cram like for a final exam every day. Generally, by the time I would get up at 5 in the morning, get into the office, get into the White House just after 5:40, and all you're doing is scanning, websites, Twitter, trying to figure out what that range of questions is likely to be. And then you're meeting with folks from the National Security Council, the Economic Council, the Office of Indigenous Affairs, whatever it is, you're bringing them in and saying, hey, there's this story out there about this. There's a narrative. We've been asked 4 questions about this. Where are we on this? What's the question? How do we frame we are? What can I say? What can I in terms of classification? But you basically spend 3 to 4 hours every day cramming, trying to guess what the 90% or so of the questions are going to be. And then you run back and forth frantically into the office to make sure the president agrees with what you're going to say.
Thank you.
If our second student from Palm Beach Atlantic University is ready, please stand, introduce yourself, and ask your question.
Hello, my name is Ashley Allen from Palm Beach Atlantic University, and I'm a junior studying journalism. My question is kind of 2 parts. It's aside
There are
from
always
issues...
2 parts, Ashley.
Yes.
I've seen this.
Well, then you're prepared.
No, I just know what's coming.
So, aside from issues of national security, do you think the public always has a right to the truth? And what role does absolute truth play in deciding how that information is communicated to the press?
Yeah, I think absolutely. If it's not national security related or won't reveal sources and methods, then absolutely. But let's be honest. It was funny. I've had a similar question before, and I was thinking about this morning. I was flipping through the cable channels, and one of the journalists it was on was talking about the president's announcement that he wants a Space Force. And this is how they introduce this. We cannot find a single government official or military official that agrees with the president's decision. And I was like, really? Think about that kind of a statement. So the answer is that I would argue that it goes, as someone who has been doing PR for 25 years, your job is to go out there and put the best, so when you talk about, let's say, economic, where the economy is right now, or get out there today and say, look, the president's policies are having results. 3.9% unemployment, Black and Hispanic unemployment is all-time low. Economic growth is at 4.1%. Now, if there's some indice here that isn't exactly moving in the right direction, yeah, I wouldn't announce it. That doesn't mean I'm lying. It's just that you highlight and accentuate the good and maybe don't push the bad. But that's what happens. So when you ask a question like that, it's difficult because, in theory, the entire truth would be to say, I'm going to give every statistic I can to give you the most complete picture. The reality is that, that's not how it works. You get out there and you talk about why your policies are working. There could be competing studies that say, hey, the tax cuts that the president implemented aren't having the effect that you guys are claiming. You're not going to go out there and say that. But that's how everything works. There are stories that happen all the time where I will call a reporter and say, if you're going to write this story, here are 5 key things that you need to put in to add in the context. They'll leave them out. Not always. Maybe they put 2 in, maybe they put 3 in. You can think, did they not present the entire story? Absolutely. But that's not always their job. It's to say, well, we added one of those facts and we left out 3 and we didn't think that really was important or relevant. But there's judgment decisions all the time that we all make. That you can have this discussion about whether it was the complete answer or not, but I think there's a difference between lying and saying it's not 4.1% economic growth, it's 6. Well, that's clearly a lie. There's another area of trying to figure out what to include and what not to.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All
You're
right.
supposed to actually, just to get you ready, you're supposed to then say, but I have a follow-up.
Exactly.
Just getting you ready.
I'll talk to her later.
Okay.
Sean, having worked for 2 South Florida congressmen, how have this area's policy priorities changed over time?
That's fascinating because I think that obviously because of the aging population that exists in a lot of this area, that there's always going to be that. You've got a high veterans population. You've got, but it's very diverse. I mean, Mark represented at the time. He went out to Fort Pierce and up through Okeechobee. A lot of ag issues that maybe aren't as prominent in Beach and Broward or parts of Broward or definitely Miami-Dade. So there's a lot of diversity. And I think that, to some degree that's evolved, but you've got everything from the Everglades to veterans issues and the VA hospital to, taxes and things like that. So I don't know, but I can't say that I've kept up that close, but, and obviously, you think about now, the president's proximity and coming down here, you have, the effect, and the mayors know this, of what it's doing on local government and emergency services and all that. That probably is the biggest issue in this area in terms of the president's frequency to this area and the impact that it has on traffic and local government and services. I would imagine that's probably the most drastic shift that's occurred in this area in terms of actually impacting local government and taxes and that kind of stuff.
Right. You commented on the Russians, that the Russians wanted to undermine our institutions. Do you believe the president's comments on Twitter regarding judges, media, and the FBI do the same thing?
I think that I don't think that we have the same styles. He's a fighter, and he pushes back. I think that I would recommend that there's a lot more people who serve in government do so out of a desire to serve our country, and we should recognize that we need to support them and to support those institutions. If we have problems or there's wrongdoing, we need to call it out, call out people who abuse the system. But as I mentioned earlier, I don't think that painting everybody in an institution with a broad brush is helpful. So I think that's a tactic that I think would be better focused on issues of wrongdoing or specific instances of malfeasance.
I have a follow-up question.
Of course.
Are President Trump's tweets official White House policy?
Of course they are. I've been asked that question before. I don't know how, if you're the president of the United States, when you say something, you say it. That's just, I'm sorry, it's interesting how that debate goes because they have to be. And there's a lot of people, I think it's hard to sort of delineate where the person is if you're president and where the president is. I think you are president 24/7. You say something that's, it's interpreted, especially if you tweet it out.
Right.
It's not like a private account. It's just like, hey, that's for my family.
In a moment, we're about to ask the last question, but in a moment, Sean will be out of the lobby for any of you that would like to have your book signed. Our last question comes from Carol. I enjoyed your book. A light question. If you were granted 3 wishes, what would they be?
Oh, that's good. I don't know. I think that there are a lot of things that I help. Like everything from alleviating. I think getting rid of disease, helping to cure some illness and make society and people a better place would be where I'd probably go. I've had people ask all the time, "What's on your bucket list?" And I'm like, "My bucket's full." I've just been blessed with so many opportunities that I think what I love. What I would do is try to figure out ways that I think I could improve our culture, our people, our society, and help people.
All right, we'd like to thank Sean Spicer for joining us here today. He'll be making his way to the lobby. And we look forward to seeing everyone on September 24th for Mark Leibovitz. Thank you very much.